Invisibility isn't about being unseen. It's about being so perfectly present that you become part of the room itself. In the obsidian room, I am the crystal that catches light, the shadow that anticipates needs, the only breathing thing men like Kong Joon-hyuk trust not to have ambition. That trust was my armor. Until the night I broke it to save his life. I watched Park Ye-joon's hand hover over the 1998 Chateau Margaux, a wine worth more than 6 months of my rent. Watched his fingers uncurl just enough to reveal the glass vial catching violet under the low amber lights. The powder fell in a spiral, 5 grains, maybe 6, dissolving into burgundy with the shimmer of crushed nightshade and something worse. Enough to stop a heart in 12 minutes. Enough to make it look like natural causes while his empire transferred to the man who killed him. My hands didn't shake as I lifted my tray. My breathing didn't change. But my mind was counting the seconds until Kong Joon-hyuk would lift that glass, counting the steps between my station and table 4, counting the exact angle I'd need to make it look like an accident. I should have turned away. Should have cleared the lobster shells from table 7 and collected my cash tips and gone home to my cramped studio where nobody knew my real name. But Kong Joon-hyuk, the dragon, they called him, the man who'd never looked at me long enough to remember my face, reached for that glass with the same deliberate control he used for everything. His fingers closed around the stem. And I made a choice that would drag me from the shadows into the center of a war I'd spent 3 years avoiding. My foot caught the edge of the Persian rug. The tray tilted, and $1,200 of poisoned wine erupted across the chest of Chicago's most dangerous, man-like blood across marble. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a moment to hit that like button if you love suspenseful, emotional stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter. We also want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Whether it's your city, your country, or even just your favorite spot to watch these stories, we love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's get back to the story and see just how far courage can take someone when danger is closing in. Time fractured into glass shards. The Chateau Margaux arced through the air in a burgundy spray, catching the amber gaslight like liquid rubies. It hit Kong Joon-hyuk's chest with the wet slap of violence, soaking through Tom Ford wool and Italian silk in a spreading stain that looked exactly like what Park Ye-joon had intended. A killing blow, just delivered by the wrong hand. The room inhaled as one organism. Every conversation died mid-syllable. Forks froze above plates. The jazz piano stuttered into silence. Even the bartender's cocktail shaker stopped its rhythm. In the obsidian room, where power was measured in silence and control, I had just committed the unforgivable sin of chaos. Kong Joon-hyuk didn't move. Didn't flinch, didn't even blink as wine dripped from his lapel onto the black marble floor in fat, accusatory drops. He simply sat there, perfectly still, while $1,200 of Bordeaux soaked into fabric that cost more than I made in 3 months. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe in the shifting light. His eyes found mine. I'd been invisible to him for 3 years. A piece of furniture that occasionally refilled water glasses and cleared plates. But now those obsidian eyes locked onto my face with the kind of focus that made prey animals understand they'd been seen by something that lived at the top of the food chain. My mouth opened. The apology was already forming, the performance of mortification I'd rehearsed in the 3 seconds it took for the wine to leave my tray. Sir, I'm so sorry. I don't know what. The rug, Leave us. His voice cut through my stammering like a blade through silk. Low, controlled, with an accent that turned English into something sharper than it was meant to be. The words weren't directed at me. They were directed at the room. I watched Park Ye-joon's face cycle through confusion, then calculation, then something that looked almost like fear. He'd been sitting directly across from Kang Jun-hyuk, close enough to watch his plan dissolve in wine and ruined fabric. Close enough to see that the glass he'd poisoned was now a puddle on the floor, mixing with Bordeaux and creating a violet-tinged stain on the Persian rug. Hyung, Park Ye-jun started, using the honorific for older brother that didn't quite mask the ambition underneath. "Let me call." I said leave. Kang Jun-hyuk's gaze never left my face. "All of you." The room moved like water finding cracks. Chairs scraped. Napkins were folded with shaking hands. The sommelier appeared from nowhere with towels that Kang Jun-hyuk ignored. Within 30 seconds, table 4 had emptied. Within a minute, the entire dining room had cleared except for the manager hovering near the kitchen doors, his face the color of old snow. Park Ye-jun lingered at the edge of the room, his manicured fingers curled into fists at his sides. He was younger than Kang Jun-hyuk by maybe 5 years, handsome in the way of men who'd never been told no, dressed in a slate gray suit that screamed new money trying to mime old power. His eyes found mine for just a second, a look that promised I wouldn't survive the night. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the dragon. Kang Jun-hyuk rose from his chair with the same deliberate control he used for everything. Wine dripped from his suit jacket onto Italian leather shoes. He was taller than I'd realized, broad-shouldered and built like violence wrapped in expensive tailoring. The tattoo on his neck disappeared beneath his collar, but I could see where it emerged again at his wrist, scales and claws rendered in ink that looked like calligraphy. He took one step toward me. My body understood the danger before my mind caught up. Every instinct I'd honed over 3 years of hiding screamed run, but my feet had forgotten how to move. I was a waitress who just destroyed a $1,200 bottle of wine and ruined a suit that cost more than my yearly rent. I was invisible furniture that had just become catastrophically visible. I was a dead woman standing. "What's your name?" His voice was quieter now, which somehow made it worse. The kind of quiet that preceded breaking bones. "Danielle." My voice came out steadier than it should have. "Danielle Smith."
A lie.
But he didn't need to know that. His eyes traveled over my face with the thoroughness of someone cataloging evidence. The tight bun that erased personality. The lack of jewelry. The careful posture of deference. He was reading me the way I'd learned to read rooms, and I hated how exposed it made me feel. "Danielle Smith," he repeated, testing the name like he was tasting something bitter. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir." 3 years. Something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise, but close. "And in 3 years, you've never spilled a single glass?" The question hung between us like a knife. I could lie. Should lie. Should play the clumsy waitress so thoroughly that he'd believe it was just an accident. Just my foot catching the rug at the worst possible moment. But Kang Jun-hyuk was looking at me like he could see through skin and bone into the truth underneath, and I realized with cold certainty that this man had built an empire on reading people the way I read rooms. So, I made a choice. "No, sir," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I've never spilled a single glass." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more dangerous. "Then perhaps," Kang Jun-hyuk said softly, "you should explain why you chose tonight to start." His hand closed around my wrist before I could answer. Not violently. That would have been easier to process. Instead, his grip was precise, measured, the way you'd hold an instrument you were about to dismantle to understand how it worked. His fingers were warm against my pulse point, and I knew he could feel my heart trying to break through my ribs. "Walk." The command was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of something that didn't expect to be refused. He moved me through the dining room like I weighed nothing, past the manager whose face had gone from snow pale to ash gray, past the kitchen doors where line cooks pressed themselves against stainless steel counters to let us pass. No one met my eyes. No one asked questions. In the obsidian room, when the dragon wanted privacy, even God had the sense to look away. The back hallways smelled like bleach and old cigars, the industrial spine behind the velvet facade. He pushed through a door marked private into what must have been the manager's office. Dark wood desk, leather chairs, walls lined with photographs of the room's history. Men in tuxedos shaking hands with other men in tuxedos, the documentation of power changing hands across decades. The door clicked shut behind us with the finality of a cell lock. Kang Jun-hyuk released my wrist, but only so his hand could find my throat instead. He moved so fast I didn't have time to breathe, pressing me back against the wall with his palm flat against my windpipe. Not crushing. Not yet. Just enough pressure to make me understand how easily he could. His body was a wall of controlled violence inches from mine, the wine-soaked suit close enough that I could smell the Bordeaux mixing with expensive cologne, and something darker underneath, gunpowder, maybe, or just the particular scent of men who made other men disappear. Who sent you? His face was so close I could see the exact shade of his eyes, not pure black like I'd thought, but dark brown with flecks of amber that caught the dim light. Beautiful if beauty could kill. Park? The Russians? Or are you working for someone smart enough to use the help as cover? His thumb pressed against the hollow of my throat, right where my pulse hammered against skin. No one sent me. My voice came out strangled, smaller than I wanted. I work here. I'm just a waitress who destroys $1,200 of wine for no reason. His laugh was cold, surgical. Just a waitress who's worked here 3 years without making a single mistake? Just a waitress who looks at me like she's calculating exactly how many ways I could kill her. He wasn't wrong about that last part. I was calculating. Guard up, knife in ankle holster, eyes tracking exits I couldn't reach. But he didn't need to know I'd spent 3 years learning to see death coming. I saw Park Ye-jun put something in your glass. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, driven by the pressure on my throat and the animal certainty that the truth was the only thing that might keep me breathing. A vial, violet powder, 5 or 6 grains. It dissolved in seconds. His hand didn't move from my throat, but something shifted in his expression. Not belief. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Interest. Why would Park poison me? His voice dropped lower, almost conversational, like we were discussing weather instead of fratricide. He's family. He's been by my side for 3 years, ever since I brought him from Seoul. Why would he? I don't know why. I forced the words past the pressure on my windpipe. I just know what I saw, and I know that if you drunk that wine, you'd be dead in 12 minutes. Maybe less. Kang Jun-hyuk studied my face with the intensity of someone reading a contract for loopholes. His free hand came up, fingers gripping my jaw to turn my head left, then right, examining me like I was evidence that might reveal its secrets under the right angle of light. You're lying. But he said it like he was testing the theory, waiting to see how I'd react. I'm not. Then you're working with him. This is the setup. Spill the wine, claim poison, make me paranoid enough to turn on my own people while your real employers move in. I don't have employers. My hands were pressed flat against the wall behind me, deliberately visible, deliberately non-threatening. I have a job that pays cash and doesn't ask questions. That's all I need. That's all I want. What's your real name? The question caught me off guard, a different blade from a different angle. Danielle Smith. His thumb pressed harder against my throat, making spots dance at the edge of my vision. Try again. That's my name. The lie tasted like copper on my tongue. No. He leaned closer until I could feel his breath against my face. That's the name of someone who doesn't exist. Someone who appeared in Chicago 3 years ago with no history, no references, no digital footprint beyond a social security number that was issued 2 months before you started working here. I make it my business to know everyone who works in establishments I frequent. So I'll ask you one more time. What's your real name? My lungs were burning. The office was shrinking down to just his eyes, just his hand, just the choice between truth and suffocation. Sarah. The name came out like a confession. Sarah Mitchell. From Atlanta. His hand loosened fractionally. Not much. Just enough to let me drag in half a breath. Sarah Mitchell from Atlanta. He repeated it like he was memorizing every syllable. And why is Sarah Mitchell from Atlanta hiding in Chicago under a fake name, working for cash, trying very hard to be invisible? Because 3 years ago, I saw something I shouldn't have seen. The truth was bleeding out of me now, unstoppable. And the people I saw it from have been looking for me ever since. What did you see? I met his eyes, and in that moment, I understood that Kang Joon-hyuk and I were the same kind of survivor. Different sides of the power spectrum, maybe. Different methods. But we both knew what it meant to be hunted. A murder, I whispered. I saw a murder, and I ran before they could make me the second body. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or respect for a fellow ghost. His hand dropped from my throat, leaving red marks I could feel pulsing against my skin. He stepped back, putting distance between us for the first time since we'd entered the room. Show me, he said. Show you what? Show me where Park put the poison in my glass. Show me exactly what you saw. And if you're telling the truth, his eyes went cold again, glacial. Then Park Ye-jun just made the last mistake of his life. He opened the door and gestured for me to walk through it first. Not an invitation. A command from a man who just decided whether I lived or died, and chosen, for now, to let me breathe. I walked. The dining room had transformed in our absence. Where chaos had reigned 10 minutes ago, now there was only surgical efficiency. A cleaning crew moved through the space like ghosts, erasing evidence of my catastrophe. The Persian rug had been rolled and removed. The table had been stripped bare. Even the wine-soaked chair had disappeared, replaced with an identical twin that showed no signs of violence. But they'd left the tablecloth. It lay draped across the bar like evidence at a crime scene, burgundy stains spreading across white linen in abstract patterns that looked almost artistic. The violet shimmer was still visible if you knew to look for it, a faint iridescence where the poison had mixed with $1,200 Bordeaux. Kang Joon-hyuk moved past me without a word, his wine-soaked suit jacket abandoned somewhere, leaving him in a white dress shirt that clung to shoulders built for violence. He pulled out his phone with the same controlled precision he used for everything, typed something short, and pocketed it again. Sit. He gestured to one of the bar stools. I sat. My legs were grateful for it. The bartender had vanished along with everyone else, leaving bottles of liquor lined up like soldiers and the ghost of jazz, still hanging in the air from speakers that had been silenced. The obsidian room felt wrong in its emptiness, like a theater after the audience had fled but before the bodies had been found. Kang Joon-hyuk stood beside the bar, one hand resting on the tablecloth, studying the stains like they were a language only he could read. He didn't look at me when he spoke. If you're lying, he said conversationally, I'll know in approximately 15 minutes. And then I'll ask Park to dispose of you himself, just to see how he reacts. If he hesitates, I'll know you were telling the truth, but too late to save you. If he doesn't hesitate, he finally turned those obsidian eyes on me. Then you'll die knowing you were wrong, which I imagine is its own particular hell. I'm not wrong. My voice was steadier than my hands. We'll see. The door to the kitchen opened, and a man entered who looked like he'd been pulled from a laboratory mid-experiment. Wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair tied back in a ponytail that belonged to a younger decade, wearing a black suit that hung wrong on his thin frame like he'd dressed in someone else's clothes. He carried a brushed aluminum case that caught the amber light. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance my direction. Just moved directly to the tablecloth with the focus of someone who'd learned that in Kang Joon-hyuk's world, curiosity was a terminal condition. Hyungnim. He used the honorific with the reverence usually reserved for gods or tyrants. You said it was urgent. Test the wine stain. Kang Joon-hyuk's voice carried no inflection. Full spectrum. I want to know everything in it that shouldn't be there. The chemist, because that's obviously what he was, opened his case with practiced efficiency. Inside, an array of instruments that looked too sophisticated for a restaurant back room. Portable spectrometer. Reagent vials. Test strips that changed color under UV light. This wasn't equipment you bought at a pharmacy. This was equipment you used when you needed to know exactly how someone had been killed. Or was about to be. I watched him work in silence, using tweezers to lift a section of the stained tablecloth, placing it in a clear container, adding drops of clear liquid that made the fabric fizz and smoke. His movements were ritualistic, methodical, the performance of someone who'd done this enough times to find rhythm in it. Kang Joon-hyuk leaned against the bar, arms crossed, watching me watch the chemist. His expression gave away nothing, but I could feel the calculation happening behind those eyes. He was reading me the same way his chemist was reading the wine stain, looking for the truth hidden in the composition. How did you know? He asked quietly. How did you know what Park had done? I didn't know what it was. I kept my eyes on the chemist's hands. I just knew it didn't belong. The way the powder caught the light. The way it dissolved too quickly, like it wanted to hide. And Park's face when he did it. I paused, trying to find words for something I'd only felt. He looked like someone saying goodbye. Park has been loyal to me for 3 years. People are loyal until they're not. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. You sound experienced. I worked in a place where loyalty was bought and sold like stock options. I learned to spot the moment before people decided the price wasn't worth it anymore. In Atlanta. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. In Atlanta. The chemist made a sound, sharp, surprised, the kind of noise that meant he'd found something he wasn't expecting. He held up a test strip that had turned from white to deep purple, almost black. Under the UV light he clicked on, it glowed like toxic waste. Hyungnim. His voice had gone thin. This is tetrodotoxin. Modified. Someone engineered this. Kang Joon-hyuk's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. How much? Enough to kill 3 men your size. Maybe 4. The chemist's hands were shaking now, just slightly. It's designed to mimic cardiac arrest. Untraceable in a standard autopsy unless you know exactly what you're looking for. Whoever synthesized this knew what they were doing. Time to death. 12 to 15 minutes from ingestion. Paralysis in 6. You'd be conscious for all of it. Locked inside your body while he caught himself, seemed to remember that he was describing his employer's almost murder. It's not a good death, Hyungnim. The silence that followed had weight and teeth. Kang Joon-hyuk turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd spilled the wine, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't calculation or threat. It was the dawning realization that a woman he'd never noticed, a piece of furniture with a pulse, had just saved him from dying conscious and paralyzed while his empire burned around him. Sarah Mitchell from Atlanta, he said softly. Who exactly are you? Someone who's seen enough death to recognize it. I met his gaze, exhausted from 3 years of hiding and 10 minutes of having a hand around my throat. Someone who thought she could stay invisible forever. Someone who was apparently very wrong about that. He moved toward me, each step deliberate, until he was standing close enough that I could see the wine stains on his collar, smell the Bordeaux mixing with adrenaline. His hand came up, and I flinched despite myself, but he only tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear with surprising gentleness. "You saved my life tonight." His voice was quiet, almost wondering. "Do you understand what that means?" I understood that I just painted a target on my back the size of Chicago. I understood that Park Ye-jun would come for me the moment he realized his plan had failed. I understood that the invisibility I'd cultivated for 3 years had just shattered, like the wine glass on marble floor. "It means I'm in danger," I whispered. "Yes." His thumb brushed against my cheekbone, the gesture at odds with the dragon everyone feared. "It also means you're under my protection now, whether you want it or not." He turned to the chemist without waiting for my response. "Find Park Ye-jun, bring him to the estate. Alive. I want to hear him explain this personally." The chemist nodded and vanished through the kitchen doors, leaving us alone in the empty room with the evidence of betrayal spread across the bar like a confession. Kang Jun-hyuk pulled out his phone again, typed something longer this time, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're coming with me," he said. "And before you argue, understand that Park knows you witnessed what he did. He'll come for you tonight. Maybe in an hour. Maybe in 10 minutes. But he will come, and when he does, I'd prefer you weren't alone in whatever hole you've been hiding in for 3 years. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can." He offered me his hand, palm up, giving me the choice. "But tonight, you don't have to." I looked at his outstretched hand, at the dragon scales tattooed on his wrist, at the wine stains that marked him as a man who'd just survived his own murder. Then I looked at the empty dining room, at the evidence of poison on the bar, at the door Park Ye-jun would eventually walk through looking for the woman who'd ruined his coup. I took his hand. "Good," Kang Jun-hyuk said, his fingers closing around mine with the same measured control he'd used on my throat. "Because Sarah Mitchell from Atlanta, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about why Park Ye-jun wants me dead." He led me toward the exit, and I followed, because staying invisible was no longer an option. The dragon had seen me, and in his world, that changed everything. The car was waiting at the curb like it had been summoned by thought alone. Black Mercedes S-Class, with windows tinted dark enough to hide bodies. The driver materialized from the shadows, opening the rear door without making eye contact, without asking questions. In Kang Jun-hyuk's world, questions were dangerous and obedience was survival. "Get in." He kept his hand on my lower back, guiding rather than forcing, but the pressure was enough to remind me that choice was an illusion. I slid into leather that smelled like money and violence. He followed, filling the space beside me with controlled energy that made the luxury sedan feel suddenly small. The door closed with a solid thunk of German engineering and soundproofing. The driver pulled into traffic without waiting for instructions. "Where are we going?" I try to keep my voice steady. "Somewhere Park can't reach you." Kang Jun-hyuk was texting again, his fingers moving across the screen with the same precision he used for everything. At least not without declaring war openly. "My apartment is compromised the moment you told me where you really came from." He didn't look up from his phone. "Park has resources. If he wants to find Sarah Mitchell from Atlanta, who's been hiding in Chicago for 3 years, he'll find her. Probably already has someone watching your building." The words settled in my stomach like ice. My studio apartment with its second-hand furniture and door that locked with a chain I'd installed myself. My carefully constructed life of invisibility and cash payments and never staying anywhere long enough to leave an impression. 3 years of running, erased in a single night. I have things there. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Clothes. Whatever you need, I'll provide. He finally looked at me, those dark eyes reading my face in the passing streetlights. You saved my life tonight. That comes with consequences. Protection is one of them. Protection feels a lot like kidnapping. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his expression. If I were kidnapping you, you'd be unconscious in the trunk. This is hospitality. Hospitality with no choice. In my experience, choice is what gets people killed. He pocketed his phone and turned to face me fully, one arm draped across the back of the seat. Park Ye-jun tried to murder me tonight. He failed because you intervened. Which means he now has two problems. Me, alive and aware of his betrayal, and you, the witness who can confirm it. He'll come for you first because you're easier to eliminate. Lower profile. Less protected. A waitress who'll disappear without anyone asking questions. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. I'd built my entire existence around being forgettable, and now that careful architecture was working against me. So, what happens now? I watched the city slide past the tinted windows, Chicago at night, all glass and steel and cold beauty. You keep me locked in your penthouse until Park is dead? Until Park is handled. The distinction felt important somehow. And you're not locked anywhere. You're a guest. Guests can leave. Guests who want to survive don't. The car turned onto Lake Shore Drive, the dark expanse of Lake Michigan spreading out beside us like a void. The luxury high-rises of the Gold Coast rose against the night sky, monuments to the kind of wealth that insulated people from consequences. The Mercedes pulled into an underground garage beneath one of the tallest towers, past security gates that opened automatically, past spaces marked reserved and private, until we reached a section that held only 3 cars, another Mercedes, a matte black Aston Martin, and something low and predatory covered in a custom car cover. The elevator required a key card, then a fingerprint, then a 6-digit code that Kong Joon-hyuk entered while positioning his body to block my view. The doors closed and we ascended in silence, my ears popping as floors blurred past. 45. 50. 55. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. I'd served wealthy men for 3 years. Had seen glimpses of their worlds through open doors and whispered conversations. But Kong Joon-hyuk's home wasn't wealth. It was power translated into space and silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a kingdom. Dark hardwood floors. Minimal furniture in shades of black and gray. Art on the walls that looked expensive in the way that abstract violence always did. Everything was clean lines and deliberate emptiness, the aesthetic of a man who'd learned that possessions were vulnerabilities. The guest room is down that hall. He gestured left without ceremony. Bathroom attached. Clothes in the closet should fit well enough for tonight. I'll have proper things brought tomorrow. I didn't move from the elevator threshold. Some instinct I'd learned in Atlanta, the one that had kept me alive when everyone around me was dying, screamed that stepping into this space was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. What if I want to leave? The question hung between us like a blade. Kong Joon-hyuk turned to look at me, backlit by the window and the city beyond. In silhouette, he looked less like a man and more like the dragon inked on his skin. Ancient, dangerous, something that devoured kingdoms. Then I'll let you leave. His voice was quiet, honest in a way that surprised me. I'll have my driver take you anywhere you want to go. Your apartment, the bus station, the airport, anywhere. But understand that the moment you walk out that door, you're on your own. Park will find you. And when he does, you'll die badly because he needs to make an example of what happens to people who interfere with his ambitions. He crossed the space between us with that same deliberate control, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I don't keep prisoners, Sarah. I keep assets alive. You became an asset the moment you spilled that wine. So you can walk out right now and take your chances with a man who dissolves people in neurotoxin." Or, he reached past me and pressed the button to hold the elevator doors open, giving me a clear path to escape. "You can stay here, where Park can't reach you, and let me handle this the way I handle all betrayals." The elevator hummed, waiting. The city glittered beyond the windows like broken glass, and I stood at the threshold trying to decide if I was more afraid of the dragon in front of me or the poison that waited in the dark. "If I stay," my voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" "Information." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You saw Park poison my wine, which means you were watching him closely, which means you know something about how he moves, how he thinks, how he operates. I need that information to understand how deep this betrayal goes, who else is involved, how long he's been planning this. And after you have that information, you're free to go back to being invisible." Something shifted in his expression, not quite sadness, but close. "Though I suspect you'll find that invisibility suits you less than it used to." He was right about that too. 3 years of hiding, of being nothing, of watching life happen to other people while I served their appetizers and collected their tips. Tonight, for 10 seconds, I'd been someone who mattered. Someone who'd changed the outcome. Someone who'd saved a life instead of just surviving her own. It was terrifying how much I'd liked it. I stepped out of the elevator into his penthouse. The doors closed behind me with a whisper of finality. "Smart choice." Kang Joon-hyuk moved past me toward the windows, pulling out his phone again. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Don't touch anything in my office. And if you hear gunfire," he paused, considering, "stay away from the windows and get on the floor. Bulletproof glass only works if you're not standing directly against it." That's comforting. It's practical. He glanced at me over his shoulder. "Welcome to my world, Sarah Mitchell. It's considerably more complicated than carrying plates." I watched him make a call in rapid Korean, his voice dropping into command mode, and realized that I'd just traded one kind of danger for another. But at least this danger knew my real name. At least this danger had looked at me like I was worth saving. The guest room was down a hallway lined with abstract art that looked like crime scene photographs rendered in paint. I didn't look too closely. Some things were better left unexamined. Behind me, Kang Joon-hyuk's voice carried through the penthouse, cold, controlled, deadly. He was calling in his war council, preparing to hunt the man who'd tried to kill him. And I was here, in the dragon's lair, no longer invisible. I wasn't sure if I'd been rescued or captured. Maybe I thought closing the guest room door behind me, it was both. Sleep was impossible. I lay in a bed that cost more than 3 months of my rent, wearing borrowed silk pajamas that whispered against Egyptian cotton sheets, staring at a ceiling that stretched into expensive darkness. Beyond the walls, Chicago glittered like broken promises. Somewhere out there, Park Ye-jun was planning my death. And somewhere closer, just down the hallway, Kang Joon-hyuk was orchestrating his revenge. At 3 a.m, I gave up pretending. I slipped out of bed, padding barefoot across hardwood that was warm despite the February cold pressing against floor-to-ceiling windows. The guest room door opened silently. Expensive hinges didn't announce departures. The penthouse was dark except for one light bleeding from beneath a door at the far end of the hall. His office, the place he'd warned me not to enter. I could hear his voice through the wood, speaking Korean in tones that ranged from surgical calm to barely restrained fury. A pause. Then quieter, almost gentle. Then hard again, the verbal equivalent of a knife finding soft tissue between ribs. I should have gone back to bed. should have honored the boundary he'd set. But 3 years of survival had taught me that information was currency, and I was suddenly very poor in a very dangerous economy. I moved toward the kitchen instead, giving myself plausible deniability. Just a guest getting water. Just someone who couldn't sleep in a stranger's home. The kitchen was all black marble and stainless steel, the kind of space that existed more for aesthetic than function. I found a glass, filled it from a tap that probably cost more than my car used to, and stood at the island pretending I wasn't listening to the man down the hall plan someone's execution in a language I didn't speak. His office door opened. I froze, glass halfway to my lips, caught in the act of eavesdropping poorly. Kon Junhyuk stood in the doorway, backlit by the glow of multiple monitors. He'd shed the wine-stained shirt hours ago, leaving him in dark slacks and a black undershirt that showed the full extent of the dragon tattooed across his collarbone and down his arm. The ink seemed to move in the low light, scales catching shadows like they were breathing. He looked exhausted. Not physically, his posture was still perfect, controlled, but there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like the weight of kingdoms pressing down on shoulders that were tired of holding them up. Can't sleep? His voice was rough from hours of speaking. Your guest room is too quiet. I set the glass down, trying to look casual despite being caught. I'm used to sirens and neighbors fighting through thin walls. The soundproofing is excessive. He moved into the kitchen, opening a cabinet to reveal bottles of liquor that probably cost more than most people's mortgages. He selected whiskey, single malt, aged longer than I'd been alive, and poured 2 fingers without asking if I wanted any. But necessary when you conduct business at 3 in the morning. Business. I watched him drink. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Planning someone's death. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In my world, those are the same thing. He poured a second glass and slid it across the marble island toward me. You should drink. It helps with the insomnia that comes from knowing someone wants you dead. I took the glass because refusing felt dangerous. The whiskey burned going down, expensive fire that tasted like oak and regret. How long have you known? About Park, I mean. That he wanted you dead. I didn't. He leaned against the counter, the first time I'd seen him adopt a posture that wasn't calculated for dominance. That's what makes it worse. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years I treated him like family. Brought him from Seoul when my father wanted him eliminated for stealing from the organization. I vouched for him, gave him position, power, access to everything I'd built. He laughed, bitter and sharp. And he repaid me with tetrodotoxin and a $1,200 bottle of wine. Your father wanted him dead? I heard the question leave my mouth before I could stop it. My father wants everyone dead. He drained his glass and poured another. It's his solution to every problem. Someone steals? Death. Someone questions his authority? Death. Someone looks at him wrong at a family dinner? Death. I spent my entire childhood watching him build an empire on corpses and wondering if there was another way to hold power. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the dragon who'd pressed his hand to my throat. This was someone else, someone who'd been given a throne made of bones and told to sit on it without complaint. And you found another way? I asked quietly. I tried. He met my eyes over the rim of his glass. I tried loyalty instead of fear. Tried building something that lasted because people believed in it, not because they were terrified of me. I thought if I could show Park mercy, show him trust, he'd prove my father wrong about human nature. He laughed again, darker. Turns out my father understands people better than I do. I thought about Atlanta. About the laboratory where I believed in science and progress and the idea that intelligence could solve problems violence created. About the moment I'd learned that belief was just another kind of blindness. I don't think your father understands people, I said carefully. I think he just expects the worst from them. There's a difference. Is there? Kang Jun-hyuk pushed away from the counter, moving to the windows that overlooked his kingdom. Because tonight, the worst is exactly what I got. Park wanted me dead, so he could take everything I built. The restaurants, the trade networks, the protection agreements, all of it. And he was willing to poison me to get it. He pressed his palm against the glass, and I could see his reflection, tired, angry, something deeper that looked almost like grief. My father would have killed him years ago, before he became a threat, would have read the ambition in his eyes and eliminated it. But I wanted to believe people could be better than their worst instincts. They can be. I moved to stand beside him at the window, keeping distance between us, but closing the gap enough to matter. I'm proof of that. I could have walked past your table tonight. Could have let you drink that wine and collected my paycheck and gone home without anyone knowing I existed. But I didn't. He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation in his eyes. Something that looked like recognition. Why didn't you? Because I struggled to find words for an instinct I didn't fully understand. Because I've seen what it looks like when good people do nothing. I've watched institutions rot from the inside because everyone was too scared to speak up. And I promised myself that if I ever got another chance to matter, to actually change an outcome, I wouldn't waste it hiding. Even if it cost you everything? I didn't have much to lose. Just invisibility and survival. Turns out those aren't worth dying for. Kang Jun-hyuk reached out, his fingers brushing against my temple where a bruise was forming from where he'd pressed me against the wall. His touch was gentle this time, apologetic. I hurt you. You thought I was trying to kill you. I should have known better. His thumb traced the edge of the bruise with surprising tenderness. You don't move like someone trained for violence. You move like someone trained to disappear. There's a difference. You notice a lot for someone who never looked at me before tonight. I notice everything. He dropped his hand but didn't step back. I just didn't think you were worth noticing. That was my mistake. You see more from your position of invisibility than most people see from positions of power. Is that why you're keeping me here? Because I see things. I'm keeping you here because Park will kill you if I don't. He turned back to the window, but I could see his reflection watching mine. But yes, you saw him poison my wine when everyone else in that room missed it. You read his intention in a gesture that lasted 3 seconds. That kind of observation is rare. Valuable. In my world, it's the difference between building an empire and becoming a corpse. I don't want to build an empire.
No.
He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. You want to survive, which makes you smarter than most people who work for me. They want power. You just want to exist without someone hunting you. I respect that. We stood in silence, watching the city sleep, two people who'd learned that survival meant seeing what others missed. The whiskey burned in my stomach. The penthouse pressed around us like expensive armor. And somewhere in the dark, Park Ye-jun was planning death in violet powder and calculated betrayal. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, the elders arrive. His voice went cold again, the vulnerability shuddering behind practiced control. My father's advisors. Men who've been running this organization since before I was born. They'll want to know why I'm harboring a witness instead of eliminating her. They'll question my judgment, my leadership, my decision to trust Park in the first place. He finished his whiskey in one swallow. And I'll have to convince them that keeping you alive is strategic, not sentimental. Is it? I met his reflection's eyes. Strategic. I don't know yet. He turned to face me fully, and the dragon was back, controlled, dangerous, calculating. But now I'd seen what lived beneath the scales. But I'm about to find out if my father was right about mercy being weakness. Get some sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow, you'll meet the men who taught me that trust is just another word for liability. He walked past me toward his office, then paused at the doorway. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving my life, even if it ruins yours. Then he was gone, back to his monitors and his plans, and his war councils speaking Korean across encrypted lines. I stood alone in his kitchen, holding expensive whiskey and expensive silence, and realized that I'd just glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. Not his wealth, not his power, his humanity. And in Kang Joon-hyuk's world, that was more dangerous than any poison. They arrived at noon like a funeral procession. I watched from the guest room window as 3 black sedans pulled into the underground garage, their arrivals synchronized with the precision of men who'd spent decades orchestrating power. Kang Joon-hyuk had warned me to stay out of sight, but he'd also positioned me where I could see everything. A test, maybe, or an acknowledgement that invisibility was a skill he needed me to maintain just a little longer. The penthouse transformed in the hour before they came. Staff I hadn't known existed materialized to arrange the living room like a courtroom. Chairs positioned for hierarchy. Tea service laid out on tables that had been empty last night. The warmth I'd glimpsed at 3 in the morning vanished behind protocol and tradition. Kang Joon-hyuk stood at the windows in a fresh suit, charcoal, 3-piece, tailored to intimidate, looking every inch the dragon his reputation promised. The man who'd touched my bruise with apology had disappeared behind expensive fabric and controlled violence. This was the version of him that built empires. The version that killed without hesitation. I wondered which version was real, then realized, with cold certainty, that they both were. The elevator doors opened, and 3 men entered like they owned the space more than he did. The first was white-haired and ancient, moving with the careful dignity of someone whose body had outlived its usefulness, but whose mind remained sharp as surgical steel. He wore a black suit that looked older than I was, gold rings on fingers that had probably signed death warrants before I was born. Behind him came 2 others, one Korean, one white, both in their 60s, both carrying the particular stillness of men who'd survived by knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the killing. The white-haired man's eyes found me immediately. I'd pressed myself into the corner of the guest room doorway, trying to be architecture again, but his gaze landed on me like a predator spotting movement in tall grass. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just assessed me with the clinical detachment of someone calculating my worth in bullets. Joon-hyuk. His voice carried the weight of decades and continents, accented English that had been learned in another era. You called an emergency council. I expected to find you preparing Park Ye-jun's body for disposal. Instead, I find you entertaining guests. The Korean word he used, was diminutive, the suffix you'd use for a child. A deliberate insult wrapped in familial address. Elder Kang. Joon-hyuk's voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Thank you for coming on short notice. Please sit. We have much to discuss. They arranged themselves in the chairs like pieces on a chessboard. The white-haired man, Elder Kang, apparently sharing Joon-hyuk's family name, took the central position. The others flanked him, sentries guarding a king who'd stopped fighting his own battles years ago. Joon-hyuk remained standing. A power play, making them look up at him in his own territory. Park Ye-jun attempted to assassinate me last night. He delivered the information without preamble, without emotion. Tetrodotoxin. Modified. Designed to mimic cardiac arrest and transfer my operations to him before my body cooled. The elders didn't react. Not with surprise, anyway. The Korean one, thin-faced, with wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a scholar instead of a killer, tilted his head slightly. "And yet you live." "Because she intervened." Jun Hyuk gestured toward me without turning. "Sarah Mitchell. She witnessed Park poison my wine and destroyed it before I could drink." Elder Kang's eyes traveled over me again, more thoroughly this time. I felt exposed despite being fully dressed, dissected by a gaze that had learned to measure human value in purely transactional terms. A waitress. An observer. Jun Hyuk's correction was subtle but firm. Someone who sees what others miss. She saved my life. And in doing so, became a liability. The white-haired elder stood, moving toward me with the slow inevitability of a glacier. Up close, he was shorter than I'd expected, barely my height, but his presence filled the room like smoke. "She knows who you are, what you are. She's witnessed an internal conflict that should remain internal. The protocol is clear, Jun Hyuk. Witnesses are disposed of. Quietly, efficiently, with gratitude for their service." He said it like he was discussing weather. Like my death was a foregone conclusion that only required scheduling. "No." Jun Hyuk's voice cut through the room like a blade. The silence that followed had teeth. Elder Kong turned slowly, his age falling away to reveal something ancient and dangerous underneath. "No. She's under my protection. That makes her untouchable. Your protection is not absolute." The thin-faced Korean elder spoke for the first time, his voice reedy but sharp. "The council has authority over matters of organizational security. A witness to internal conflict represents a threat. Your personal gratitude does not outweigh collective safety." "My personal gratitude." Jun Hyuk moved then, stepping between the elders and me with deliberate positioning. "Is irrelevant. What matters is that Sarah Mitchell possesses intelligence capabilities this organization needs. She identified Park's betrayal when everyone else in that room missed it. She read intention in a 3-second gesture. That skill is an asset, not a liability. An asset that knows too much." Elder Kang's rings caught the light as he gestured dismissively. "Your father would have eliminated her the moment her usefulness ended. He understood that mercy toward outsiders is how empires fall. My father built an empire on corpses and fear." Jun Hyuk's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I'm building something that lasts longer than the next assassination attempt. And that requires people who can think, who can see, who can do more than just kill on command." "Idealistic." The white-haired elder smiled, and it was worse than his anger. "Just like when you vouched for Park Ye-jun. How did that idealism serve you? He tried to kill you. He pointed at me like I was evidence in a trial. Will betray you too. It's what outsiders do when they learn too much about our world." I felt the words like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they might be true. I'd spent 3 years running from people who decided I knew too much. Now I was standing in a penthouse surrounded by men discussing my execution like it was a business decision. Maybe it was. "Sarah." Jun Hyuk didn't turn around, but his voice found me across the space between us. "Tell them what you told me last night. About Atlanta. About why you're hiding." My mouth went dry. This was the test. Not whether I could stay invisible, but whether I could make myself visible in a way that mattered to men who measured value in violence. "I worked at a biotech lab." My voice came out steadier than my hands felt. "I saw my supervisor falsifying trial data on a cancer drug that was killing patients instead of curing them. I reported it. 2 days later, 3 people were dead, the lab burned, and I was running because I was supposed to be the 4th body." I met Elder Kang's eyes, refusing to look away. I know what it means to see something I shouldn't. I know what people do to protect their secrets. And I know that survival sometimes means being useful to someone more powerful than the people hunting you. The old man studied me for a long moment. Then he turned back to Junhyuk. She's clever. I'll grant you that. But cleverness without loyalty is just another word for opportunism. How do you know she won't sell what she knows to the highest bidder? Because Junhyuk finally turned to look at me, and something passed between us that I couldn't name. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of two people who'd both learned that trust was just calculated risk. She had 3 years to sell information about the Obsidian Room and never did. She could have walked past my table last night and let Park's plan succeed. Could have used my death as leverage or escape. Instead, she saved my life knowing it would destroy her invisibility. That's not opportunism. That's something rarer. What? Elder Kang's voice was sharp. What is it? Integrity. Junhyuk said it like he was surprised to find it still existed. Something my father taught me was weakness. But I'm beginning to think it might be the only thing that separates us from Park Ye-jun. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. The elders exchanged looks that carried decades of shared history and unspoken communication. Finally, the thin-faced Korean spoke. Your father will not approve. My father doesn't have to. Junhyuk's voice carried finality. I lead this organization now. And I'm making a new protocol. People who save my life don't get disposed of as a reward. They get protection. They get valued. And they get the choice to walk away when this is over. Elder Kong smiled again, that terrible expression that suggested he knew something the rest of us didn't. And what makes you think she'll want to walk away? You've shown her your world, Junhyuk. You've made her visible. You've given her power by making her valuable to you. That's more dangerous than killing her. Because now she knows what it feels like to matter. He moved toward the elevator, the other elders following like shadows. At the threshold, he turned back. Keep your witness. Protect your asset. Build your empire on integrity if you think it will hold. His rings flashed as he pressed the elevator call button. But when she betrays you, and she will, because everyone does eventually, remember that I offered to spare you this lesson. Your father learned it young. Perhaps you need to learn it the hard way. The elevator doors closed on his warning, leaving Junhyuk and me alone in the penthouse with the weight of prophecy and judgment. He turned to look at me, and I couldn't read his expression. Couldn't tell if he believed the elder's warning, or if he was gambling that I was different. They're wrong, I said quietly. I won't betray you. Everyone says that. But he didn't sound convinced of the warning or my promise. He sounded tired. Until they do. Then I'll just have to prove them wrong. Yes. Kong Junhyuk moved to the windows, looking out at his kingdom like he was trying to see where the next betrayal would come from. You will. Because if you don't, Sarah Mitchell, the elder, is right. My father's way wins. And everything I'm trying to build dies with it. The message came at sunset, 3 days after the elder's visit. I was reading in the guest room, a book from Junhyuk's collection about the history of organized crime in Chicago, because understanding his world felt like survival when I heard his office door slam. Not the controlled closure of a man who measured everything, but the violence of someone who'd stopped pretending to have restraint. I found him standing at his desk, phone in hand, staring at the screen like it had just delivered a death sentence. The last light of February sun cut through the windows, turning him into a silhouette of barely contained fury. What happened? I kept my distance, reading the tension in his shoulders. Park. The name came out like poison. He has my chemist, the one who tested the wine. Took him from his apartment 2 hours ago. He held up the phone so I could see the message on the screen. He wants to negotiate an exchange. The text was brief, written in English for my benefit. Your scientist for your waitress. Warehouse District, Pier 9, midnight. Come alone, or I start removing his fingers. My stomach dropped. He knows I'm here. Of course he knows. Jun Hyuk threw the phone onto the desk hard enough that I heard something crack. Park's been watching this building since the night you spilled the wine. Probably has someone in my security detail feeding him information. He knows the elders came. Knows they wanted you dead. Knows I refused. He turned to look at me, and the dragon was fully present now. Cold, calculating, lethal. And now he thinks you're my weakness. Aren't I? The question came out quieter than I intended. That's what he's counting on. He moved to a panel on the wall that I'd assumed was decorative, pressed his palm against it, and watched it slide open to reveal an arsenal. Guns arranged by caliber. Knives that looked like they'd been forged for specific purposes. Body armor. Everything a man needed to wage a small war. He thinks I'll trade my chemist's life for yours because I've gone soft. Because I chose mercy over protocol. Because I'm trying to be something other than my father. He pulled out a handgun, matte black, compact, deadly, and checked the magazine with practiced efficiency. He's not entirely wrong. But he's made one critical miscalculation. What's that? He thinks you're a liability I'm protecting out of sentiment. Jun Hyuk selected a second gun, smaller, and turned to face me. He doesn't understand that you're an asset I'm protecting out of strategy. There's a difference. The words should have stung. Should have reminded me that I was a useful tool, nothing more. But the way he said it, with something that looked almost like respect, made it feel different than when the elders had called me clever. You're not going to trade me. It wasn't a question.
No.
He crossed the space between us, holding out the smaller gun grip first. I'm going to kill him. But first I need to know. Can you shoot? I looked at the weapon like it was a snake. I've never. That's not what I asked. His voice was patient but firm. Can you pull a trigger if someone is trying to kill you? Can you aim at center mass and fire? Can you do violence to stay alive? I thought about Atlanta. About running through smoke and fire while security guards shouted behind me. About the 3 years I'd spent invisible, choosing survival over principle every single day. About the moment I'd spilled that wine, knowing it would destroy everything I'd built to stay hidden. Yes. I took the gun. It was heavier than I expected, warm from his hand. If it means surviving, yes. Good. He produced a holster, showing me how to position it at the small of my back where a jacket would hide it. His hands were clinical, professional, but I felt the heat of them through my clothes. Park is expecting me to come alone. To walk into his trap like an idiot blinded by sentiment. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's suicide. That's strategy. He smiled, and it was terrifying. He'll have shooters positioned. Probably 6, maybe 8. Standard ambush formation. High ground, overlapping fields of fire, escape routes blocked. He'll monologue because men like Park can't resist explaining how clever they are. And while he's talking, you'll be exactly where he doesn't expect you to be. Which is where? Somewhere he's already dismissed as irrelevant. Jun Hyuk moved back to his arsenal, selecting items with the care of a surgeon choosing instruments. Park thinks like my father. Sees people as either threats or furniture. He'll position his men to watch for my security, my soldiers, my obvious backup. He won't be watching for the waitress he tried to make me trade. Because to him, you're not a person who makes decisions. You're a thing that gets moved around the board by more important players. Understanding dawned cold and sharp. You want me to use his contempt against him. I want you to be what you've always been. He handed me a comm unit, small enough to hide in my ear. Invisible. The thing people don't see until it's too late.
Can you do that?
I thought about 3 years of carrying plates to men who never looked at me. 3 years of hearing confessions and threats and business deals because I was furniture with a pulse. 3 years of understanding that invisibility was power when you knew how to use it. Yes. I fitted the calm into my ear. I can do that. Then here's what's going to happen. Junhyuk pulled up a map on his phone, showing me the warehouse district in blue and white. I'll arrive at midnight as requested. Park will have me in the kill zone within 30 seconds. But you'll be there 2 hours early, positioned in the rafters or the catwalks, somewhere above their sight lines. You'll have your phone on silent, recording everything. And when I give the signal, you'll do exactly what I tell you. Nothing more, nothing less. What's the signal? I'll say your name. His eyes met mine with intensity that made my breath catch.
Sarah.
Not Danielle. When you hear me say Sarah, you move. Understood. Understood. He equipped me like I was going to war. Tactical jacket that could stop a knife. Dark clothes that would blend with shadows. The gun at my back like a promise. And through it all, his hands were steady while mine shook with the understanding of what we were about to do. He'll kill your chemist anyway, I said quietly. Even if you went alone and unarmed. Even if you gave him everything he wanted. I know. Junhyuk checked his own weapon one last time. That's why I'm bringing everything I have. That's why I'm bringing you. I'm not a soldier.
No.
He turned to face me fully, and in the dying light, he looked like something ancient and unstoppable. You're something more dangerous than a soldier. You're someone who sees what others miss. Someone who acts when acting costs everything. Someone who saved my life knowing it would destroy yours. He reached out, his hand cupping my face with surprising gentleness. Park Ye-jun thinks you're my weakness. Tonight, we're going to teach him the difference between weakness and value. The touch lingered longer than it should have, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone where the bruise had faded. Then he stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself like armor. The car leaves in an hour. Wear dark colors. Bring the gun. And Sarah, he paused at the doorway to his office. If this goes wrong, if Park's trap is better than I think, you run. You take the car, and you run so far that neither Park nor my father nor anyone else in this world can find you. Promise me. I'm not going to run. Promise me anyway. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before, not command, but plea. Because if you die tonight trying to save me, then the elders were right. Mercy is weakness. Trust is liability. And everything I'm trying to build dies in a warehouse at midnight because I was fool enough to believe people could be better than their worst instincts. I looked at him standing in the doorway, backlit by his office and his weapons and his war. Looked at the man who'd pressed his hand to my throat 3 days ago and touched my face with apology tonight. The man who was gambling his empire on the belief that I wouldn't betray him. I promise, I lied. Because we both knew I wasn't going to run. Wasn't going to let him die alone in Park's trap while I disappeared back into invisibility and safety. 3 years ago, I'd run from Atlanta and spent every day since regretting that I hadn't stayed to fight. Tonight, I was choosing differently. Tonight, I was choosing to matter. Junhyuk must have seen it in my eyes. The lie, the decision, the understanding that I was about to break my promise before I'd even made it. But he didn't call me on it. Just nodded once, acceptance and resignation mixed together. 1 hour, he said. Then we go teach Park Ye-jun what happens when you mistake value for weakness. He disappeared into his office, and I was left standing in the penthouse with a gun at my back and a choice that felt less like strategy and more like fate. The city glittered beyond the windows, beautiful and brutal. Somewhere out there, Park Ye-jun was preparing his trap, setting his shooters, counting on Junhyuk's sentiment to make him stupid. He was about to learn that sentiment and strategy weren't always opposites, and that the most dangerous person in any room was the one everyone forgot to watch. I went to change into dark colors and checked the gun one more time, making sure I understood how to release the safety, how to aim, how to become someone who could do violence to stay alive. The waitress who'd spent 3 years invisible was about to become very, very visible. And Park Ye-jun would never see it coming. 3 weeks later, I walked into the obsidian room through the front entrance. The last time I'd entered this space, it had been through the kitchen doors with a tray balanced on my forearm and my identity compressed into a uniform and a false name. Tonight, I wore a dress that cost more than 6 months of my old rent. Midnight blue silk that moved like water, custom-tailored to fit a body that had learned it was allowed to take up space. My hair fell loose around my shoulders instead of pulled into that brutal bun. And on my left hand, barely visible beneath the sleeve, was a thin scar from where I'd cut myself climbing down the warehouse catwalk too fast. A reminder. A trophy. Evidence that I'd survived becoming visible. The maitre d', who'd once looked through me, now met my eyes with something close to reverence. Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Kong is waiting at your table. Not the waitress. Not help. My name, spoken with the same deference usually reserved for people who could end careers with a word. I wondered if he remembered the girl who'd served his tables for 3 years. Probably not. Invisibility had a way of erasing memory. The dining room fell into that particular hush that meant something important was happening. Conversations didn't stop, but they softened, pivoted, adjusted to accommodate new information. I felt eyes tracking my movement across the floor, not the blank gaze of customers assessing service, but the sharp attention of predators recognizing a new player in their ecosystem. Kang Jun-hyuk sat at table 4. The same table where Park Ye-jun had tried to poison him. The same table where I'd spilled $1,200 of wine and destroyed my carefully constructed invisibility. He'd claimed it like a memorial, turning the site of betrayal into a throne. He stood when I approached. The dragon in a black suit that probably cost more than my car used to, but I'd learned to see past the expensive tailoring to the man who touched bruises with apology and said my real name like it was a signal flare in the dark. You're late. But he was smiling. I'm exactly on time. I let him pull out my chair, the one that used to belong to Park Ye-jun, now mine by right of survival. You just arrived early because you're paranoid someone will poison your wine again. Can you blame me? He settled into his seat with that controlled grace that still made my breath catch sometimes. The last time I trusted the wine service here, I nearly died. The last time you trusted the wine service here, you met me. Exactly. His eyes held that warmth I'd first seen in the warehouse, standing over Park's body while sirens wailed. A near-death experience. A server appeared, young, nervous, definitely new, with 2 glasses and a bottle I recognized from the wine list. Not the Chateau Margaux. That vintage was retired now, a ghost that haunted the room. This was something else, something chosen for the message it sent. We're starting fresh, building something new on the ruins of what came before. The server poured with shaking hands, probably terrified of spilling on the dragon or his mysterious companion who'd appeared from nowhere and claimed the seat of power beside him. I watched him work with the clinical eye of someone who'd done this job 1,000 times, noting the angle of the pour, the way he kept his thumb off the rim, the careful distance he maintained. Thank you. I said it gently, meeting his eyes, giving him the acknowledgement I'd craved for 3 years. That's perfect. He looked startled that I'd spoken to him at all, then grateful. Then he was gone back to the kitchen where I imagined the staff was dissecting every detail of this evening. The dragon and his guest. The woman who sat where Park Ye-jun used to sit. The rumor that she'd killed 2 men in a warehouse while most people were sleeping. Some of those rumors were true. The ones that mattered were. They're calling you the Dragon Shadow. Jun Hyuk lifted his glass, studying the wine in the low light. The woman who appears when you're in danger, who sees what others miss, who turns invisibility into a weapon. That's dramatic. That's accurate. He set the glass down untouched, and I understood. We were performing for the room, but the real conversation happened in the spaces between words. The elders have accepted your position.
Grudgingly.
With significant reservations about my judgment. But they've accepted it. And your father? My father. Jun Hyuk's expression hardened briefly, then smoothed. Will adjust or he won't. Either way, I'm done building his empire. I'm building mine.
Ours.
Something that lasts because people choose it, not because they fear it.
Ours.
The words settled between us like a promise. I got a call from Atlanta yesterday. I hadn't planned to tell him tonight, but secrets felt wrong in this space where we'd both nearly died. The people I was running from, 3 of them are in federal custody. The 4th is dead. The lab burned, but the evidence survived. They're calling it the biggest pharmaceutical fraud case in a decade. So you're free. He said it carefully, watching my face. You could go back. Reclaim your real life. Stop hiding. I could. I lifted my wine glass, studying the way light moved through burgundy. But I'm not sure that life fits anymore. The woman who ran from Atlanta 3 years ago doesn't exist. She died in a warehouse when she stopped running and started fighting. And who exists now? I thought about the question. About the girl who'd learned to be invisible, who'd counted poison grains from 20 feet, who'd fired a gun for the first time and discovered she could do violence to protect someone I stopped that thought before it could complete itself. Some truths were too dangerous to examine directly. Someone who's still figuring that out, I said honestly. Someone who knows she can't go back to serving tables and pretending to be furniture. Someone who's learning that being seen is terrifying and necessary and maybe the only way to actually live instead of just survive. Jun Hyuk reached across the table, his hand covering mine, thumb brushing against the scar on my wrist. And someone who saved my life.
Twice.
Who proved the elders wrong. Who showed me that building an empire on something other than fear is possible. He paused, and for a moment the dragon disappeared entirely, leaving just the man who'd stood in his kitchen at 3 a.m. carrying the weight of kingdoms. Someone I can't imagine building this without. The words hung between us, heavier than any confession. Around us, the obsidian room conducted its business. Deals were made. Alliances forged. Empires negotiated over appetizers and aged whiskey. But at table 4, something else was happening. Something that looked like 2 people who'd survived death together learning what came after survival. The staff is staring, I said quietly, aware of the attention we were drawing. Let them stare. Jun Hyuk's hand tightened on mine. Let them see that the woman who used to be invisible is now the most important person in this room. Let them understand that power isn't just about fear or violence or the ability to make people disappear. It's about choosing who stands beside you when the world tries to tear you down. And you chose me. You chose yourself. His smile was soft, private, meant only for me.
You chose to spill that wine.
To save a stranger. To walk into a warehouse with a gun you'd never fired. I just recognized what you already were. Which is what? Dangerous. He lifted his glass in a toast.
Brave. Brilliant.
Someone who sees the truth in things others miss. Someone who turns invisibility into power and power into loyalty. Someone who proved that mercy and strength aren't opposites. His eyes held mine across the rim. Someone I'm very glad didn't let me die. I touched my glass to his, the crystal ringing clear in the space between us. Someone who's very glad you looked at her long enough to see her. We drank, and the wine tasted like new beginnings and burned bridges, and the particular flavor of choosing to be visible in a world that preferred you silent. The door opened, and Elder Calm entered with his entourage, silver hair catching light, those ancient eyes scanning the room until they found us at table 4. He didn't smile, but he nodded once, acknowledgement if not approval. The prophecy he'd delivered about my inevitable betrayal hung unspoken between us, disproven but not forgotten. I nodded back. Not deference. Equality. The dragon's shadow meeting the dragon's father on level ground. They'll keep testing you, Jun Hyuk said quietly, watching the elder take a seat across the room. Waiting for you to prove them right. Waiting for the betrayal they're convinced is coming. Then I'll keep proving them wrong. I set my glass down, steady despite everything. For as long as it takes.
For as long as you need me to.
And if I need you forever? The question caught me off guard, stripped of his usual control, raw and honest, and terrifying in its implications. I looked at him across the table where Park Ye-jun had tried to kill him, where I'd made the choice to matter, where everything had changed in the space between 1 second and the next. Looked at the man who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd trusted me when everyone said I'd betray him, who'd handed me a gun and believed I'd know when to use it. Then I smiled, feeling the last of my old life fall away like ash. You're stuck with me. His laugh was genuine, unguarded, the sound of someone who'd been holding their breath for weeks and finally remembered how to exhale. I can think of worse fates than being stuck with a former waitress who killed 2 people in a warehouse. Than being stuck with the woman who saved my life and proved that everything my father taught me about trust was wrong. He leaned back, glass in hand, king surveying his kingdom. Besides, you're not a former waitress. You're the dragon's shadow. There's a difference. There was. And sitting here at table 4 in a dress that cost more than my old life, holding wine I used to serve, carrying a gun I now knew how to fire, I understood that difference completely. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't furniture with a pulse. I wasn't Sarah Mitchell running from Atlanta or Danielle Smith hiding in Chicago. I was someone new. Someone forged in poison and wine and gunfire and trust. Someone who'd learned that the most dangerous power wasn't the ability to disappear. It was the courage to be seen. Jun Hyuk raised his glass, one more time. To new legends. To new legends, I echoed. And in the obsidian room where I'd once been nothing, I became everything I'd been too afraid to imagine. The story they'd tell later would get the details wrong, would turn me into myth and symbol and cautionary tale. But the truth would live in this moment, a woman and a man at table 4, building an empire on something more dangerous than fear.
Hope. Trust.
And the radical belief that people could choose to be better than their worst instincts, even when everything in their world insisted otherwise. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Sarah Mitchell learned this in the span of $1,200 of spilled wine and 3 weeks that changed everything. She went from invisible furniture to the dragon's shadow, from hiding in the kitchen to sitting at the head table. But here's what this story is really about. We're all invisible until we choose not to be. How many of us move through life like Sarah did for those 3 years? Present but not seen. Surviving instead of living. Wearing masks that keep us safe, but also keep us small. Sarah's transformation isn't just a dark romance. It's a revolution. It's the radical act of believing you deserve to take up space. Of trusting that your voice matters. Of understanding that the right people will celebrate you when you finally step into the light. And here's the thing that gets me every time about this story. Kang Jun-hyuk didn't save Sarah. She saved herself. And in doing so, she saved him too. She proved that mercy isn't weakness. That trust isn't a liability. That building something real requires the courage to be vulnerable, even when everything in your world says vulnerability will destroy you. So, let me ask you something. Where in your life are you still invisible? What table are you serving instead of sitting at? What voice are you silencing because it feels safer to stay quiet? What version of yourself are you hiding because you're terrified of what happens when people finally see you? Transformation doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the moment you decide that hiding is more dangerous than being seen. It happens when you spill the wine, when you take the shot you're not sure you can make, when you walk through the front door instead of sneaking through the back, when you choose to matter. All right, I need to know, which scene in this story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Sarah spilled the wine, knowing it would destroy everything she'd built? The warehouse showdown where she fired a gun for the first time? That 3 a.m. kitchen conversation where Jun-hyuk finally showed his humanity? Or maybe it was the ending, Sarah walking through the front door of the obsidian room, finally visible, finally seen? Drop a comment right now and tell me. I read every single one, and I want to know what moment made you stop scrolling and feel everything. And if you're Team Sarah and Jun-hyuk, if you believe in building empires on trust instead of fear, if you love watching characters choose courage over safety, if you want more stories about women who refuse to stay small, hit that like button. Let me know this is the kind of content you want to see more of. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I've got more stories coming that will make you feel seen, challenged, and absolutely wrecked in the best way. And here's the thing. Stories like this aren't meant to be consumed alone. If you know someone who's been hiding too long, someone who needs to be reminded that being seen is power, not weakness, someone who deserves to take their seat at the table, share this video with them. Send them the link. Watch it together. Start the conversation. Because maybe they're waiting for permission to stop being invisible. And maybe this story is that permission. To everyone watching this who's ever felt invisible, to everyone who's been told you're just the help, just supporting cast in someone else's story, to everyone who's spent years perfecting the art of taking up less space, this story is for you. You are not furniture. You are not the supporting character. You are the main character in your own legend. And when you're ready to stop being invisible, when you're ready to spill the wine, take the shot, claim your seat, the world will be ready to see you. The dragon's shadow started as furniture with a pulse. She ended as a legend. Your transformation starts the moment you choose to be seen. Now go take your seat. The table has been waiting for you.